Okay, we are back. Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session for Wednesday, April 3rd, 2024. Our live stream should be active for this next two sections of the work session. And it's 10:03 a.m. We're picking up with item 2, legislative session wrap-up, recap, and 2025 priorities. We have Deborah Munguia, our lobbyist. Legislative advocate. I didn't know. I knew there was a better title than that, but I wasn't thinking of it. To give us kind of a recap, and I think I'll just turn straight to Deborah.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Commissioners. Nice to see everyone. And I really enjoyed that last section that you did. I think it's only fair for me just to say, by way of introduction, that I have been with the county doing their lobbying work since 2017. And been very privileged. I started contract lobbying in 2017, so I started with Thurston County. And before that, I worked in state government, so state government employee for almost 22 years. And about 10 of those were with the State Department of Natural Resources. And so I've got a lot of history in natural resource policy. And in fact, my last position with DNR was as the Habitat Conservation Plan Manager, to get the HCP in place for the state forest practices rules for private forest lands. And so was able to get that accomplished. And I did rulemaking and things like that before. And what I realized was I really enjoyed working in public policy issues, but what I really enjoyed was helping to form those policy issues. So it was just the legislative piece of it, went back to Congress a couple times and talked to the delegation there. I decided I wanted to shift my focus to doing lobbying work. And so then I went to work for the Forest Protection Association, which is a private trade association representing large forest landowners in the state. And I worked there for almost 11 years, and then I went into contract lobbying after that. So I've been doing lobbying for about 18 years now, and very privileged to be working with Thurston County and all of you. So, okay, so with that, I want to just give a quick update on what happened during the 2024 legislative session. We'll talk about what they did in terms of the budgets, talk about the county's legislative priorities, some additional areas of interest, and then what the next steps would be. So on slide 3, it was a short legislative session. It ended in early March. And the purpose of the short sessions is for the legislature to come back and make changes to the biennial budgets that they approved in the previous session. So it's their supplemental budget here. They have 3 budgets: operating, capital, and transportation. And so it was a short session, but it was really intense. And they're all intense, but this one, I think for some additional reasons, was even more intense. The Democrats still hold a very strong majority in both the House and the Senate, but I think one of the reasons that the session was really intense was because they were dealing with something different this year, and that was the 6 citizen initiatives that were delivered to the legislature that they had to decide what they were going to do. And that took up a lot of bandwidth, and they were really important issues, and so they really had to think about how they wanted to deal with them. And as you know, they adopted 3 of those initiatives, one on popular pursuits, one on a prohibition against state and local income taxes, and then parental rights related to education. So those 3 passed. The other 3, they did not take action on, and so those initiatives will be on the November ballot. And those are going to be really important on what happens with those initiatives. One is to give people an option to opt out of the mandatory Long-Term Care Act. One is to repeal the capital gains tax, which will have a big impact on the state budget because right now about $1 billion for the biennial budget comes from the capital gains revenue, and that goes into education and child care. And so if that is repealed, the legislature will have to figure out a way to replace that money. So they'll be looking in other places to replace that. And then the third is repealing the Climate Commitment Act. And that one is, if that is repealed, that is going to have a really big impact on both the capital budget and the transportation budget. Maybe not as much so on the operating budget, but the other 2 budgets, it's going to have a big impact.
Why do you think that they took action on those three instead of let all six go? What's your read on, like?
So, on the first three, the hearings that they had on those made it very clear that in the legislature's opinion, it didn't really, except for the vehicular pursuits, it didn't change current law. So, on the parental rights and on the state and local income taxes, they felt that that was current law and they could agree to that. On vehicular pursuits, that was a really tough one for legislators to deal with. There were some legislators that felt like the legislature went too far in the changes that they made, and that it was contributing potentially to different things that were happening with, the law enforcement not being able to stop people who were fleeing in cars unless it was for, a few specific things. So that was a really tough vote, and it was really, if you watch the floor speeches on that, they were very emotional floor speeches on legislators that weighing in on that. So that was the three that they took action on. The three that they didn't take action on, they did not want to propose an alternative to any of those three. All three of them have big impacts on the budget, especially the last two that I talked about. And the majority party feels very strongly that the citizens of the state are going to continue to support especially the capital gains and the Climate Commitment Act.
Do you think that the ones that they passed, it was the feeling was kind of the inverse, that the majority party thought a majority of the citizens weren't going to be in favor of the current policy, so they just?
I think it was, I wasn't in the room when they were talking about this, but I think that it was calculated in terms of addressing the initiatives and being very thoughtful about which ones that they felt that they could move forward on, and then focusing on the others and the advocacy that would be around keeping those in place, or conversely, having them repealed. So, I think that it was, again, I think it took up a lot of bandwidth during the legislative session behind closed doors in terms of how they wanted to deal with those 6 initiatives.
I went to a meeting where they explained it, I can't spit it back to you, but I went to a meeting where they explained very great detail why they did what they did, and it was very, very tactical.
Yeah.
They know that the ones they passed were the were the ones that they were probably gonna lose, and then it would have a spillover effect. It would increase turnout and potentially engender the ones that, as Deborah said, have much more public support.
Mm-hmm.
So they felt like by neutralizing those, keeping these three, they'd have a better chance of maintaining these three, and they're more impactful in a sense, because as she said, the other one, 2 of them were just kind of restatements of law in a way, whereas the Climate Commitment Act, in my opinion, would be absolutely devastating to overturn that, and hugely impactful on many fronts, capital gains tax as well. So there was a lot of thought that went into that strategy.
Deborah, wasn't there something to do on that strategy end that Ty's talking about, on when they can make adjustments to changes, whether the voters make the change or the legislature makes the change, the time difference, that they could make adjustments played in there somewhere?
So if the legislature adopts it, then it would take a simple majority in the next legislative session to make changes to it if they wanted to do that. But if it is a citizen initiative that is, that the voters vote on and adopt, then the legislature has 2 years.
Yeah, that was another piece that was talked about in that meeting. Yeah, there's you have more control. You retain more control over it if you pass it yourself, because then you can make an amendment to it.
Yeah.
If initiative passes, it's locked for 2 years, right?
So,
Right,
yeah,
with a supermajority.
I just didn't know how to
I
explain
forgot
it.
about that, yeah.
Okay, and then they also dealt with other policy issues, public safety. There was a lot of discussion about behavioral health, substance use disorder. There was discussion about property tax increases and real estate excise tax increases, which, as you know, those did not pass. And then there was a lot of discussion about climate bills and environmental bills. So just real quickly on the operating budget, some of the key highlights, again, substance use disorder, they put an additional $215 million into that. A lot of money went into the public schools, childcare and early learning. Again, that is where a lot of the capital gains money goes to. There was a lot of discussion around housing and homeless services. If you'll remember, last session, the legislature called it the Year of Housing, and this year they called it the Year of Housing 2, because there were so many housing bills that were discussed. A lot of money went into climate and clean energy, and when we get into the capital budget, I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then higher ed and workforce development. On the capital budget, I'm not going to go through all of these bullet points, but you can see where they had an additional 1.3 billion for the capital budget, but it was very constrained. They weren't really able to, they didn't have a whole lot of money to spend in the capital budget in terms of new projects.
Can you break this down for just Thurston County?
Yeah, I will. So you can see where they put big buckets of money, but I will point out that a lot of these, like the grants for clean buildings and clean energy dollars and EV charging and even the additional money that went into the fish barrier removal board and the grants for green jobs and infrastructure, all of those included the budget with the caveat that the funding didn't start until January 1st of 2025. And if the initiative that repeals the Climate Commitment Act is approved by the voters, that funding goes away. So they had to be very careful about how they put this budget together so that they didn't obligate money that maybe might be going away at the beginning of the year. I believe they had a little over $688 million from the Climate Commitment Act from this budget. And then on the transportation budget, again, they're being very careful about how they put the budget together on that, because if you'll remember, when the legislature passed the Move Ahead transportation package, they assumed $16 billion from Climate Commitment Act revenues over a 16-year period. And as you know, gas tax revenues continue to decline, and infrastructure needs, preservation and maintenance needs continue to go up. And so the transportation budget could be in a world of hurt if the Climate Commitment Act is repealed. But you can see on that slide some of the big buckets of money where they did focus the transportation budget.
I have a question on the transportation piece of it, right? I learned a lot about it, and kind of what I learned from the state is that kind of like they're in the same boat that we are, right? We've been kind of shifting funds from the transportation to kind of feed the general. And, you know, that's, I feel, one of the reasons the transportation budget is under a lot of hurt. There's a variety of reasons, understandably. But I'm wondering, like, what is going to happen, right, what is that hurt going to look like for us here locally? Like, how is that going to impact us?
On the transportation budget?
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I will say that I didn't put on the slide is in terms of transportation and specific to the county is that the county is fully funded now for doing the roundabout at Vail. Because that was something that was put in the transportation budget last year, but for whatever reason, Thurston County was not appropriated enough. And so we worked very closely with Representative Barkas because this is a priority for him, and he was able to get that funding specifically put into the budget. And so that will be there. That is there. That's not dependent on Climate Commitment Act revenues. In terms of what with the state's transportation budget, they actually have the situation where the operating budget has been putting money into the transportation budget the last couple of years. And so, you know, some of these other revenue sources dry up, the operating budget may not be able to feed that money into the transportation budget, which will make it even harder. And in terms of how the transportation budget does things with CRAB and TIB and things like that, I think all of that will be impacted. And if you need me to, I'm speaking in like state, local government acronyms, so if you need me to explain what those are, please let me know. I apologize. Okay, in terms of the county legislative priorities, one of the top things was fiscal sustainability. And we met with our delegation, we talked to them about that. And in the end, the 1% lift bill did not pass. There was a lot of different reasons for that. It hopefully we'll be back again next year. It's like one of those things that seems to be perennial. It keeps coming back, sometimes in a little bit of different form. So we'll have to see, you know, and especially if state government revenues have to be lifted too, because other revenues go away. Maybe they'll look at that again. And the state did lift it for themselves for a few years, and then now the state's back to 1%. So that might be something that could be, and it's not going to be an election year next year. So it could be a different variable next year.
Is that just like state being back to 1%? Is that like, when did that kick in? Is that for next
This year.
year? This
Yeah.
2024?
That's my understanding.
And how long have they been exempted from that?
I think 4 years is what they gave themselves during the 4-year budget. Is that
Sounds
correct, Robin? Yeah, yeah.
Well, that could help maybe.
That might
What
help.
it's
Yeah, yeah.
like.
We'll all be in this same bucket together.
Yeah, between that and the ARPA money going away.
We'll see. And then protecting the Capitol Forest. There was some money put into the capital budget for that. The total amount was 15 million, but it involved different counties, and I think 5.7 of it was for the counties that Thurston County is in. So I don't know how much.
And then,
Encumbered lands,
and then it's
yeah.
all contingent on on the climate commitment act.
Right, right. And so you know all of the things that were put into the budget language in terms of the hoops that need to be jumped through in order to get some of that. And I don't know how that relates to the amount that would actually come to Thurston County, but my understanding is that the majority of it was designed to go towards Thurston County or Capital State Forest. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Funding for animal services is also something that was important to the county, and while we didn't get anything in the budget, I did meet with the chair and another leader of the Legislative Fur Fighter Caucus and talk with them about that. And at the time, actually, Dr. Lisa Parsley, not a city council person, but as Dr. Parsley, who has been working with animal services and has done various different things. We went in and talked with the legislators about this, and there was a proviso that was put into the budget that was bigger than just county animal shelters. It was a whole bunch of different things that the Department of Agriculture has to study and report back to the legislature on by June 2025. But they need to do an assessment of animal welfare issues like animal abandonment, rescue organization operations, veterinary services shortages and costs, all those kinds of things, so that they can decide, you know, how they want to address this. But in the meantime, I want to continue talking with them about specifically county animal shelters. And then I know that in Thurston County, the animal shelter here, my understanding is that building's going to have to be torn down. And they're going to have to figure out what they're going to do in terms of a new building. And so that might be something that we want to think about in terms of a county-specific request to the legislature when they do their biennial budget next year, and see if maybe we can get, a local community project, LCP request or something like that, to help specifically with that. And it could be a regional thing too, so we could be working with our regional partners here and maybe making it a shared agenda item or something like that. That would be good.
So what, can you repeat, what did you say that was discussed in terms of a budget ask, or you said there was a broader?
Yeah, so a proviso was put into the operating budget that the State Department of Agriculture has to do a study to take a statewide to do an assessment of current animal welfare issues, costs and needs and things like that.
That was included?
Yeah, that's in the budget, that was approved. That isn't due though until June 30th, 2025, which is after the 2025 session ends. So probably if the legislature was gonna take any recommendations from that and fund anything, it wouldn't be until the 26 or 27 legislative session. But in the meantime, I think that with our county-specific issues, we should be thinking about, how we wanna do that, how we wanna approach, our delegation.
So can you explain that to me? It's been flagged but not funded. Will be open for discussion?
It has been funded, yeah.
Study.
Study.
is funded,
But the
and
study-
that's it.
The study's
Okay.
been funded, yes,
Okay.
correct.
We're gonna look into it.
Oh, got it.
And it's for the entire state, because there were other counties that were coming to the legislature saying, we also have animal issues too, and so.
Like, they get those studies, like, somebody's got an issue, and they're not gonna get their issue funded, so like, at the last minute, they do some kind of amendment on somebody else's thing, and they get a little bit of money to do some little study, and that's kinda how it works, right?
This is a particular study just for this issue,
Yeah.
so, maybe I didn't understand your question.
Proviso?
It's a
Yeah,
proviso.
budget
It's a
proviso.
proviso, which means that they can only spend the money on that study.
Yeah.
They can't use the money for anything else, so they're most likely going to do it.
But you're right, if there is a particular issue and it doesn't get a legislative fix, there's often a
Representative
practice
so-and-so is like,
of-
I want an amendment
of
to get this one little win,
Getting a
yeah.
proviso in to be able to study it further and keep it alive.
It keeps it alive and it also allows them to say we're doing something
Yeah.
about it. Yeah, whether or not, anything ever comes of a study later is a whole different conversation.
Do you know where they're at on the jail study, by the way?
I don't know where they're at on that particular study. Do you have a sense of where they're at with that?
That is moving forward. I'm trying to,
Juliana said about that.
yeah. We can get you an update, but there is continued movement on that front.
Okay. I know we submitted our stats, so I was just wondering.
And then I jumped over the local board of health, but we were successful in getting legislation passed to modify Thurston County's requirements for having how many commissioners need to sit on the local board of health. So thank you to everybody that helped with that one too.
Well, and thanks to you. Deborah did a lot of carrying of water and making sure that we were in front of all the committee members, et cetera, that we needed to be to deliver that one, so thank you.
My pleasure. And then in terms of other areas that wait, let me go back, sorry. Legislative priorities. So you had your shared issues for housing and homelessness. I'll get into that in a second. There was no additional funding for local parks. The sexually violent predator, less restrictive alternative bills that are the 35th delegation introduced, they were not successful. However, the Representative Couture was able to get an amendment or a proviso in the budget that, and I didn't write it down, so I'm going from memory here, but requires the Department of Corrections to do communication with locals. And so I can get you this, I think I sent you them, yeah, but I can get you the specific language if you're interested. So there was there was a little bit of movement on that. And then the meat processing facility request was not funded either. It was a very constrained year in terms of the budget, the capital budget. Additional areas of interest, just real high level, land use, of course, you know that the WUI bill passed 6120, and I believe you're having a discussion on that issue after this, maybe? I saw that on the agenda?
In part,
In part, okay.
it's connected.
Oh, okay, got
It's
it,
not-
got it.
We're not
Okay.
really gonna be discussing that bill, just how it
The
would fit
ordinance.
into another set of changes we're making.
Right, okay, so that was something that WASAC has been working on for a long time. WUI is Wildland Urban Interface. And so right now, there's some requirements where the State Building Code Council has to make some determinations in terms of how they adopt things affecting the WUI code. And so this bill passed so that the Department of Natural Resources, in partnership with the State Fire Marshal's Office, can do these wildfire risk assessment maps. And then the counties have the ability to update that based on local needs and working with your jurisdiction's fire marshal. So.
The first
that's-
maps that they made were like insane and would have like said that like downtown Olympia was in the wildland urban interface and they would have needed like asbestos covered houses. I'm being a little facetious, but it was almost like that. It was crazy.
So when the county does permitting of residential or commercial, they had to do it based on this code. And so anyway, and there's different risk levels and what that would require. So it makes it more real in terms of what needs to be done on the ground and gives local input onto how that should work also.
And is that,
Obviously, there's concern about what was required and then where it would apply. And there was a not complete agreement about what should be required, but everybody seemed to agree that the maps and where it was going to apply was way off. So it was a bipartisan thing because everybody, even local code officials were coming out of the woodwork going, this is ridiculous. All of Tumwater is a wildland interface and needs to cut all the trees for 30 feet around every structure. I mean, it was in conflict with all sorts of other multi-layered policies and.
Increased siding requirements that like made it to where, a house wasn't as susceptible to fire, but there was no chance of any wildland fire sweeping through downtown Tumwater.
so that would affect code, would it also affect insurance carriers as well?
Probably.
Yeah. It's something
Flood
similar.
map would, or
Yeah. Interesting.
our building code council if they're.
Well,
It's all Ty's fault.
No. The Building Code Council sent a letter opposing 6120 after I had to leave for the airport. And I would not have voted for that, but it didn't matter. Everybody else, it was unanimous, I think. So nobody cared what the Building Code Council thought about 6120, obviously. It was an absolutely unanimous vote in both houses of the legislature to pass it, so, including Wasack, so I was glad to see that.
And then another land use bill that is specific to Thurston County that also passed is House Bill 2296, and Representative Griffey was the prime sponsor on that. And that allows Thurston County and a few other counties and the cities within them an additional 6 months in order to get their comp plan update done. So instead of having to have it done by June 30th, it would be December 31st. So that was also very important, and we're very appreciative to Representative Griffey for taking that on and getting that passed. Even though they sound like simple little bills, there's no such thing as a simple little bill, and there's all sorts of negotiations that have to go into it and everything else. So on climate and environment, there were a lot of bills. Two big ones that didn't pass were the extended producer responsibility, or EPR bill. And then the bottle deposit bill. Neither one of those passed, but again, and they have been in front of the legislature before. I expect them to be back again next session. One bill that did pass finally was the extreme weather bill, and where Department of Emergency Management can work with local governments for extreme heat or cold or wildfire smoke issues, and provide grants to them to help, with their cooling centers or things like that. And so that bill passed. Another bill that was very controversial that also passed, that the governor just signed last week, was the House Bill 1589, the decarbonization bill, where it allows Puget Sound Energy to accelerate how they plan to shift people from natural gas over to electricity. So it narrowly passed in the House by one vote, actually. And of course, Thurston County is served by PSE. It may be that there will be more discussion on that bill as it moves forward. Some claim that it is not constitutional, so we'll have to see if there's going to be any lawsuits that come out of this, or what happens in terms of rate increases or things like that. They passed a bill that that's phasing out mercury from lighting products, reducing lead in cookware, zero emission school buses, grant program, prioritizing for overburdened communities and older buses, food waste reduction and organic material management grant programs. So there were a lot of climate bills that were passed. On behavioral health and substance use disorder, one important bill that was passed was House Bill 2088, and it extends liability protections for first responders that are dispatched from mobile rapid response crisis teams and community-based crisis teams. So that was an important bill. And again, in the budget, 21 million for enhanced and expanded opioid treatment, and over 5 million for drug awareness, prevention, and education, and almost 3 million of that goes to local health jurisdictions. On housing, one bill that affects the county is House Bill 1998, which is co-living housing. So counties and cities need to update their development regulations so that they have to allow for these co-living housing developments, which on any residential lot that's zoned for multifamily that has at least 6 units per lot within the UGA and urban growth area. And so those co-living, as you probably know, is like you might share a kitchen or restrooms or something like that, more like dorm type living. They did not fund it though, and so WASAC estimates it's about a $670,000 cost to all of the counties in order to update their regulations. Another bill that passed that also wasn't funded and requires the county to update their development regulations was Senate Bill 6015 on residential off-street parking requirements. And there was a lot in there in terms of what you have to look at, but things like you can't require garages or carports as a way to meet minimum parking. You have to allow grass block pavers as parking, things like that. So
I hate parking requirements.
It will be a challenge or nuance, a new thing to incorporate to review of permits and requirements. And for us, predominantly in the UGAs, but we'll have to take it into account.
Do we have a deadline to do these updates? A timeline?
yes, and I don't have it in front of me, but I can get that to you. I'll send you one.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And I think parking requirements is something that is going to continue to be talked about because there continues to be a push for eliminating minimum parking requirements. One of the bills that did not pass this year or last year, right now only affects cities, but it's transit-oriented development, and their parking requirements was a big part of that. Rent stabilization did not pass, but I expect that to be back next year. Lot splitting bill did not pass. I expect that to be back next year. Parking requirements can be, built into the lot splitting one too. Rural ADUs did not pass. I expect the conversation to be back, and we'll see if any traction gets made in that area.
Was that specific to rural counties, though?
I don't think so. I think it was just like a rural area of a county.
Okay,
Yeah.
Incorporate it.
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah. FutureWise didn't like that bill. So
Surprise.
we'll have to see, what nuances have to be addressed in order to get something like that. The whole point, of course, is providing more housing to help with the housing crisis in Washington State. And then in terms of public safety, the legislature did fund additional corrections officer academies, 1 in fiscal year 24 and 9 in 25, and that will take care of the backlog. In terms of going forward, though, we'll have to see what they're willing to do going forward.
Where will they be?
You're just talking correctional officers, you're not talking police officers.
Correctional officers, they did put additional $4 million into the Basic Law Enforcement Academy, though, for additional, and one, I think it's, I want to say it was Snohomish County that they created an additional place where BLEA classes could take place. And so they're trying to create more classes and more geographic diversity in terms of where people can take these these classes.
But there wasn't anything Thurston specific. That's very tough.
Or enough flexibility for the WASPC to choose where it lands.
Yeah, and I know that there was discussion about maybe the Lacey training facility, and seeing if we could get something maybe out of the new Lacey area, or even South Puget Sound Community College, and I think they went with Snohomish County on that one, so. Again, if that's something that the county wants to move forward on, we can.
So our sheriff has talked about how he's in conversation with the training commission
Okay.
about sharing space, but if there's no funding for them to do so, that's something that we'd like to know.
So, I will say that, even though the legislature put additional funding in, some of the funding that was allocated in the previous year's budget was for a new regional area that they did not utilize that funding. And so that's being redirected. So I think it's good to continue to have conversations with Captain Alexander and CGTC and seeing how things are going, so that if there is an opportunity to nice facility, and they need to think about that might be something that they could do. Okay, so, in terms of the discussions that we want to have, so as you know, this is a general election year. All of the House, half of the Senate, and all of the 4-year statewide offices are up for election right now. We already know that there's gonna be a lot of legislative changes. I just heard about another one this morning. There are 6 senators that have announced they're leaving the legislature. A couple of them are running for higher office, and others they're just leaving the legislature. There are 5 other senators that are running for higher office, and they'll stay in the Senate if they don't win, but if they do win, that's gonna create a domino effect. In fact, our own Senator McEwen is running for Congress, so if he's successful, that'll create an appointment opportunity in the Senate, which would create another one in the House, potentially. And then there are 8 House members that have said that they're going to be leaving their House seats. One of those, of course, is Representative Bateman, who is running for Senator Hunt's seat, since Senator Hunt is leaving.
What is McEwen running for? What did you say?
Congress.
Okay.
Yeah.
6?
So Derek
Sixth
Kilmer's seat,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And then in terms of Congress, Representative Maycumber from Northeast Washington, she's actually running for Kathy McMorris Rogers' seat, so she's leaving the House also. So a lot of changes. Of course, Representative Wilcox, also one of our delegation members, he's leaving the legislature as well. So there's going to be some changes next year. And as I've mentioned, there's going to be there could be some uncertainty with the budget, the biennial budget for next year, depending on what happens with the initiatives. So we'll have to see how that may or may not impact what we want to do moving forward. So we want to make sure that we are meeting with our delegation during the interim. We're talking with them about the priorities for the county as part of our interim work. And then also, WASAC is in, the State Association of Counties is in the process of putting together their requests for next legislative session. And they have a deadline of April 19th for counties to submit their proposals. And so if the county has some things that they would like to put into that for other counties to take a look at and talk about, it's always helpful if you have a shared issue to get support from the association and have more dialogue with the other county commissioners about these, so that everybody can be, moving in the same direction. So that would.
And that must be in advance of the LSE planning
Yeah.
retreat
In May. It is, yeah.
And I'm guessing, I think the main topic right now has just been the public defense. So I'm guessing that's going to be one of the items, but that's an easy one for us to add to the list.
So the case of limits for public defenders, maybe, I don't know if animal shelter funding is a, big county or not. We had talked about.
I think that, there would be to understand what that need would be, there'd be a lot of work. I would think that would need to be done because, you know, it's not easy to build a building and like what, we'd be asking for $25-30 million to create some, we don't even, I don't know if we even know what that request would need to be. And that would be an unreasonable request.
One thing that you could ask for is money to study it, to see what it would cost in order to, you know, for design and that kind of thing. That's a legitimate capital budget expenditure item and it's county specific. So that isn't something that would go to WASAC for their,
Yeah.
Hours.
yeah.
Yeah.
And, I'm sorry, I missed that. What are you suggesting we ask money for?
So if the county and regional partners want to get some money for a study to determine what needs to be done for the new animal shelter, if that's what's
For the
needed.
animal shelter?
Yeah,
For the
Thurston.
animal
For
shelter.
Thurston.
Well, that's an interesting idea.
It's a part of the shared legislative agenda versus just ours, or
Right.
definitely not WASAC.
But the partners haven't even started to talk about the shared agenda for Thurston County for this year.
Isn't, like, Jazzcom's able to make that request themselves for money to study something like that, aren't they? Like,
Oh, they
That would-
could.
and then we would just support it, and then it allows us, frees us up to still make some actual, like, substantial, significant request on our own.
They could, but it would be more powerful coming through the joint, through the jurisdictions.
Who are the partners for the animal shelter?
The county, Lacey, Olympia, Tumwater, and didn't they say Yelm just joined?
It's a contract with Young.
Yeah,
Like a regional
it's-
facility?
Yeah. Our prior conversations weren't even about the shelter. They were about the operation of managing animals, which is a statewide, which I would think every county would face that. And that's why we were talking about maybe a luxury pet tax or there are other models, but creating a revenue stream to help us manage animals in every county. Not just that, oh, we want a fancy shelter in Thurston County. That's, to me,
Right,
that's a separate issue.
It is a separate issue.
And that in part with the reviso will help with the Department of Agriculture to frame that bigger picture statewide related to animal services. This being specifically a capital request supporting
And when I met with the legislators about our idea of the operations and revenue for that, they weren't real keen on a tax, on a luxury tax on pet products, but they thought that the idea of discussing maybe a state deferred sales tax or tax, probably sales tax is what it would be something that they could look at. And I don't remember the number now, but I remember that Representative Berg, who is the chair of House Finance Committee, and this would go in front of her committee. She's one of the leaders of the Fur Fighter Caucus. She talked to the Department of Revenue to find out what it is, and it is an enormous number that the state gets from sales tax from pet areas.
70.
Was it that? It was a lot of money. And so there wasn't enough time during the short legislative session to really dig into that, but she was thinking that during the interim, we could maybe talk about how we would want to narrow that down so that maybe some of that could be redirected. And so I will refresh my memory, refresh Rob's memory, and get you this information. So if that's something that you want to take to LSC and talk with them about, that might be something to do.
So they can drill down and like identify a certain class of items that
Oh,
you're
yeah.
getting sales tax from, and then you're only getting a holdback on those items?
Yeah, we could tell you right here in Thurston County how much is coming from pet-related retail. Because every business has what's called the NAICS code, yeah, the NAICS code.
Okay, well, that would be fine. If they don't want to raise the tax, they just want to give us more money back,
Yeah.
that's fine with me.
That'd be lovely.
It'd be better.
Better, really, I mean, yeah,
Yeah, it wouldn't be in their interest though,
right.
yeah.
That's what I was saying.
If
I'm
it's
trying to-
really narrow, and we have some really good leaders on the Fur Fighter Caucus, so timing is
Fur
everything.
Fire Caucus.
Yes.
What do you call it?
They call
Fur
it the Fur
Fighters.
Fighters Caucus, yes.
They have jackets with like.
I know, I want that.
Tattoo.
Yeah, yeah. And then it was too late to get legislation introduced that was something that that the county had talked about in terms of changing the conservation futures statute in order to allow acquisition of water rights. But we did have a conversation with Representative Griffey. He said, let me know if that's something that you want to pursue. So if that is something that you want to pursue, again, that would be, I think, something that could go in front of LSC if other counties would be interested in that.
I actually think that would be a really good idea. That potentially could get traction on a statewide basis because everybody's dealing with water issues. And if we can have flexibility to tap into an existing funding stream that doesn't, it's not an additional tax, et cetera, it just gives us flexibility. Or each jurisdiction the flexibility to direct those funds, whether it's in habitat acquisition or if it's in water rights acquisition, it could be one that resonates with other counties.
And then if there are other county-specific things that you think that you might want to ask for help with from the legislature, we should be doing that during the interim. Public works projects, things like that. We should be identifying those and talking with them about that.
You're talking about the fiscal sustainability goal, and you were talking about they were talking about creating the opportunity to raise property taxes, and that kind of died like in flames. Has there ever been any talk about allowing counties to have B&O tax? Is there any history on that? Like, what's the story there?
My understanding is that the cities probably don't like that, because I think it would take away from the cities. I'm not sure.
Well, it would only
you can
be
have
one.
separate.
It could be, I mean, it wouldn't be an additional
Sure.
layer, right? The cities would have their own, ours would be probably.
Like the housing
UGAs
sales
and-
tax, if a city institutes it before the county does, the city gets to establish their own, and then the county's is a separate issue. But if the county institutes it before the city has, then it affects that city. Like, well, but the housing sales tax, I mean, you could have it, you could set it up a number of different ways, but like, what's the history of trying to allow counties to establish a B&O tax?
I will have to check on that and get back to you, because I don't really know the history.
B&O,
Business
I
and
know that there's
occupation.
been
Utility.
many runs at trying for the utility tax that have
Yeah.
failed.
Maybe that's
But,
what I'm thinking.
I don't recall,
From a
there
from
might
a
have been
loss
something
act,
that I wasn't aware of.
From a county perspective, they haven't necessarily broadly, all 39 counties have not been supportive of B&O because it's generated on the gross versus the net revenues, and it doesn't resonate well, especially with our
Eastern
eastern Washington counties. But utility taxes, which is one of those tools that cities have that we don't, it has been a repeat conversation, and it's probably worthwhile having, or at least having a conversation with the LSC, but it may not get traction. It's-
And I think
it's
that's the
another
one I
tool.
was thinking of in terms of conflict with the cities.
Oh, that definitely has been.
I feel very comfortable saying that I think that any proposal to increase tax on constituents would not be well received by the minority parties in the House or the Senate.
Yeah, but like B&O tax is just picking on businesses instead of property owners, so sometimes people are,
A lot of small business owners.
well, so you can make them exempt, and then you're only nailing the Costco warehouse.
Well, then you're not getting a whole lot of, in our
it's something.
county, well, it may be, but it would be, it's framed as harmful to economic growth. And if you exempt small businesses, that's what we mainly have in the unincorporated county. Even, we have very few box stores in the,
But are you saying cities in our county already have that?
Some do.
yes.
So it's
Cities
optional.
can have B&O, but
Yeah.
counties can't.
So some do, some don't, and then you can have it set up where if you're a tiny business, you don't make enough, you don't have to pay it. I mean, there's a million ways to skin it, but like, if the property tax increase is never gonna fly, then we're gonna have a conversation about a different approach, and, even if it's not as much as you dream of, it's, you know, it's still helpful.
Maybe we want to bring up the mental health, developmental disabilities levy outside of the county general levy again. I don't know.
I don't know about that. We've taken what? I know we've done 3 runs at that.
And Wasack has done more than that.
Yeah. So,
And even at Wasack, I took a beating for the 3 years I put it there. It's like, I think you were there before that, so you were taking a beating on it.
Got it up to number 7 at one point, but they were only focusing on 4. Got it at number 7 out of 35.
That's true, that's true.
First year we tried it, it was like there was no appetite.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the second year, I really don't know what the difference was, like everybody was like, yeah, okay, maybe, nobody spoke out against it. It was actually seemed like it had support, but then when we did our ranking exercise, it just fell a little bit outside the thing. So I don't think it's impossible, but, I don't know if that's, it's hard for me to just know, is that the thing to put all the effort into, given.
So I think that until we can address the stakeholders with concerns, that bill would not go anywhere.
Yeah.
And that's been the barrier, is we are talking about how we would use the additional authority to provide better services to veterans, and we've got the veteran organization speaking out against the bill. So until we can fix that, then I don't think we should be running it.
And one of those,
Oh, we'll get you some background on that.
and
Yeah,
one of
I-
the chief proponents and supporters is running for higher office. So if he happens to be successful, Vandeweghe, then
He's a proponent of this bill, of this.
he's been a longtime proponent of pulling the veterans levy
Yeah.
out of the general fund.
And his seatmate, Representative Chapman, was our prime sponsor for this, who's running, I think he's gonna be running for Senator Vandeweghe's seat. But there are a lot of legislators that are champions for veterans issues. So Robin is absolutely correct. And I think there's been some misunderstanding, some mistrust. So I think that if we can meet with the veteran services organizations and have a joint request with them to do something like this, it would move the needle a lot
Then
further.
we have a shot at it and should run it, but we gotta fix that.
With that, I'm happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Or new ideas, what are some of the things we've been thinking about?
Okay, new priorities for next year.
I have a question before.
Go ahead.
So you mentioned the Wasack priorities for when we need to send it, but I want us to be, I guess, a little bit more prepared this year in coming up with our own legislative agenda. Usually we wait until, last year there were a lot of different factors on why we submitted ours so late or started working on it. But when do we actually really need to have our 2025 priorities set for Thurston County? What is your recommendation?
So my recommendation, my preference would be that if the county could have something no later than September, I think that would be really, really good. It would give us time to really talk with our delegation about what it is that we wanted, that we supported. The earlier you ask for financial help, I think the better, and because people start asking and they make commitments, and so it's never good to walk in at the beginning of the year and saying, we'd really like this, when they've already made commitments to a whole bunch of other people on things that they're gonna do. So if we could get something by September, and I don't know if it's anything that's gonna impact a state agency, but state agencies have to have their budget requests in by August to OFM, Office of Financial Management. And, it'd be great if we have something maybe that was with DNR and DNR wanted to support it, that they could put that in and it could be part of the the new governor's proposed budget, so.
I think, if we can have a good, solid draft of what our priorities are for 25 by the end of June, at kind of the latest, it doesn't have to be pretty, we don't have to have it pretty yet, but I think if we can have a good, solid understanding and commitment to what those are, that will help us a lot in terms of having those interim conversations.
Even the 1st of June, it's, I think the earlier the better, just like
It's
you
never
were.
too early.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So one idea that I have is, so I'd like to take this whole DNR issue kind of up a level and think big and dream big. I would like to advocate for some new model for funding schools, parks, fires, libraries. And maybe this is like, if I could ask Deborah to look into this a little bit. I'm sure that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I'm sure there's been a proposal in the past we could sort of start with as like, there's different ways to do it. But I would like to have something like that where we're asking the legislature to rethink, using timber, so entirely to fund all these different priorities. I know the superintendent of public construction, Chris Rickdahl, has worked on this and advocated for this. He might be a touch point to work with. His office might be willing to work with us on something.
Would that require a constitutional amendment?
For the schools, it would.
It would be huge. It would
Yeah,
require a lot of things.
I mean, it's better have Waspik behind you, or Wasack behind you 100% to even get a chance.
Yeah, well, we have to know what it looks like, and then I can
Trying to think of the equivalent of telling the timber state not to use timber. It'd be like going to Florida and telling them not to use their oranges.
The issue with the timber revenue is that you have the beneficiary groups. So you have the county beneficiaries and you have the common school trust beneficiaries. And that is constitutional, and so they would probably require a constitutional change. And if it impacted those beneficiaries in terms of the revenue that they got from those timber sales, and it would divert some of that to other people, there would be that to go through too.
Right, I mean, the whole thing is you have to fund all these different things, I'm not saying that don't fund schools anymore, don't fund fire, I'm saying different funding. So I would want it to be laid out so that it's neutral to the people that are receiving money. It's structurally changed from the way, and it may be I know it's not a baby step, but, I know there's been discussion, because I've heard it at Timber County's caucus meeting about the uniform trust, where you cut trees. That doesn't even have to be about cutting less trees. It's about distributing the revenue in a more equitable. But I know there's been discussion about that, because I've heard it.
In greater diversification, kind of that shifting from solely timber cutting to other investments that they could have that generates the revenue to.
Yeah, and what that does, that trust issue, what that would do is make the decision-making about where cuts are done. It would create flexibility, wouldn't change the number of trees cut. It would just create an actual flexibility about where you could do it in the best way for environmental, ecosystem services, as they call it. Right now, that's all gummed up in the what do they call it? What's the word they use? The place-based or whatever it's called, like the trusts that are place-based. And so it's like, if you just say, oh, this little stand doesn't get cut, well, you've made some people angry because they are direct, because they're not just, it's not just that X fire district is entitled to, 0.1% share of amount. They're directly their revenue is directly connected to a set of specific trees on the ground. And that's the start of the insanity from my perspective. And we have to go after this. I mean, whatever it takes, whether it's a very small first step, in a long chain, or whether it's going at the higher level and let's just change the Constitution, whatever. I mean, that's what I want to see. I'd like to see what prior efforts have been made in that direction. If there's a way for you to find that out, or direct me to the right place where I could best find that out.
I'll do a little digging and see what I can find. One idea off the top of my head is, the legislature directing a state agency to bring back recommendations on what could be done. And giving them the funding to hire a consultant that specializes in this kind of thing to kind of lay it all out and then say, here's some options that you could consider.
Yeah, think of what the legislature did on taxation, right? They spent 2 years with a committee on taxation, because that's constitutional. But there's a recognition that we have a ridiculously regressive taxing structure and it needed to change. And they're still working through what they're gonna do with the recommendations, but that's the kind of effort that we need in this arena.
Okay.
So,
I have some.
go ahead.
Well, the public defense is one, but I think that one can go to WASAC. Do not ask me details about this one, because I had a very thorough conversation with Ben Miller Todd, and right now I cannot remember a word of it. But it was the hospital certificate of need overhaul. And I will provide more details once, Ben, of course, is out of the office, but once he gets back. I remember when he talked to me about it, I was like, well, maybe we need to have a conversation with Deborah about this, so it was on my list of legislative priorities.
So is that, is that something that the county would put forward, or is that something that hospitals need to address?
I think it would be, the Washington State Hospital Association probably would be a better,
Supported by.
Supportive, but
Yeah,
supported by the
Right.
county. But just have that on the list, I guess, of things that we should be at least tracking in the future. And then I think for a priority for us, that's going to be coming, it's the right-of-way housing.
What is it now, ERP, or what are they?
No,
yeah,
it's still there.
it's migrating to ERP versus right away.
But I think it's just, we need to, the operations of it, I mean, counties cannot sustain that going into the future. It's going to take away from projects that we have on our priority list that need to be built. And, you know, that money will have to be diverted just to keep those ones functioning. So I think there just needs to be a long-term plan for projects the state put forward for a right-of-way.
Can I ask a couple of questions? I want to make sure I understand. So are you saying that, so the state provided some money and they only did 2 million in this budget for
Yeah.
right-of-way encampments when the governor requested 10? But are you saying that, so that money is used to do what they did along the right-of-way, but then the facilities that are necessary in order to keep people housed, those are not funded? Is that?
They gave us like
It's
3
the
years or
M&O
something.
3 years, yeah.
It's the ongoing M&O costs
Yeah.
of the facilities that were built with the right-of-way money. We'd also, if we want to get specific here, we need to advocate for match funding for Franz Anderson.
And I think that so that's good to know. I think that the right-of-way housing thing is definitely something that goes beyond Thurston County. So that might also be something that could be brought up to WASAC to see what kind of support. King County's not a part of WASAC anymore though, right?
Nope, not yet.
And
Pierce
maybe not
County
Pearson,
and-
Morrison, Homer's, depending on-
They're still in.
They're still in currently, but we'll see.
But it could be something that we, if they're not in, we could go to them as a partner, in partnership with, and work with them on.
I was going, oh shoot, I just blanked on what I was going to, another thing. The DNR housing, I know that the housing project that they had, it didn't go through this year and they were gonna come locally and ask us for funds, but I think we should work with them again for next year to do a state proposal. Again, it just takes away from our local projects, especially if it was not something that would, you know, it's on our 5-year plan. And so I think it's a worthwhile project to look at, but they, just for the utilities for it, I think is what they were asking for last year. It was around 2 million that they were requesting.
I don't remember.
I don't
I
know.
think just housing in general is gonna be a huge thing, especially as we go forward with doing the new, comp plan parts on housing. And that is already starting to show that the need far outstrips the region's ability to fund it or grow it. So that's becoming a huge concern very quickly.
Deborah, did you, when you gave us your briefing, you said something about the ADUs in the UGA,
In the rural, yeah.
and did they get that passed where, okay, so that didn't get there, but that's a big piece of housing for me.
The ADU piece really is a necessary thing for that.
I don't know what the Marcus was ramrodding that, right? And it just didn't quite make it.
Senator Braun was very supportive as well. I know that Senator Lovelet, who is chair of Senate Local Government, she's from a rural district. She has concerns about septic tanks and capacity for septic tanks, and so I think that's something that needs to be addressed. And then FutureWise has concerns about, growing outside of the
It's rural densification issue.
Well, yeah,
How
but
that-
even if you used within the UGA, I mean, if it's all kept with it as a start,
I think that is how it was within
Still
the
couldn't-
UGA in the unincorporated area, yeah.
what about expanding the septic service to the UGA areas a little better? I don't know, is there anything in there that could help that?
Possibly.
You mean the utilization of septic versus sewer in the UGA?
Yeah, I mean sewer, expanding sewer service,
That would help.
for
yeah.
like they did for schools a while back, so you could build outside of that area.
Yeah, I think, a lot of the ability to expand the availability of sewer infrastructure within UGAs that are yet to be, it's the financial equation, because it's often waiting for some development that's going to have some proximity to an existing line to do the extensions. And they haven't done a lot when it comes to funding, or grants, et cetera, to actually help lower some of those costs.
It's already allowed, right, I mean,
Within the
you're
UGA,
saying that,
totally.
like, within the UGA, sewers can go in there, and you're saying like they did with schools, where if a school's outside of the
Just
city,
outside- just
they allow it to
outside
be
of
plugged
UGA.
in, but UGA, so you're saying residences just outside the UGA being allowed to be
Yeah,
on?
within a close proximity, I don't know what that might be, but, and the other piece of that is like what you guys did down in Tenino, where you could do it maybe through a tight line type. Isn't that something you proposed out of Dakota at one time?
Yeah, we wanted to plug into Bucota, but like Rob said, it's all money.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
How about our Tilly campus? That was, you talked
Right,
about
that was one of our thoughts was to gain some additional flexibility apart from schools, which are allowed under RCW, but to allow that to be extended to a public facility that would help facilitate a connection potentially for the Tilly campus that would then reduce or increase the flexibility of functionality of that campus when it comes to vehicle washing, et cetera, which that septic system can't handle. So we have to bring all of our vehicles up to the work to have that kind of
Oh,
thing.
wow.
So it's trying to get that flexibility, I think would be worthwhile. But to get that extension outside of the urban areas for sewer, it's got to be a really narrow focus to get the legislature, because of the number of opponents that would not be supportive of it. So to keep it really tight to public versus housing, which I think a lot of people would assume is a slippery slope to UGA expansion and or, urbanization of the rural areas, that would be the challenge.
maybe we can narrow it to like existing public facilities if people, right? Because infrastructure is expensive too. Like, it's not like we can move our public works building, like there's just,
Well, I think we'd want to, maybe not that narrow of because you think of our new south, our new collection facility potentially that's going to be sited, we would want to have the flexibility of the, services that we could do there. And so if we could plug into another sewer system.
There's
that's
no
out-
sewer there for you.
I know.
You ain't
But-
plugging into that. You might plug into a water system.
In an ideal world, so maybe to have it narrow, but not too.
Are we throwing out ideas of what we care about? I have on my list county revenue sources, of course, continuing that discussion. Regional meat processing, I'd like that to still be a priority.
What was the first one, please?
County revenue sources. Regional meat processing, or ag support, public defense, funding for parks and public spaces. And, I know they have RCO programs, but that's like money to build something which we are not in a position to do. Additional capital project money for the Creative Districts program, the Department of Commerce or Washington Arts. There's a lot of our communities that have signed up for that program, and they're doing cool things with it. So if we get some additional money in that program, it would benefit a lot of our communities.
So would you just be advocating for support of?
More money for that program. So, yeah, they have administrative money, and then they have capital project money that they'll give out to like Yelm to make murals.
Very familiar with that
Okay.
program. It was one of the departments I had when I was in the governor's office, so.
Rural ADUs is a discussion that I think is important. And then a capital, whatever, if we're gonna do some kind of big capital budget request, I think it would be worthwhile for us to start now having discussions on what that would be. And then, I don't know if this is a county-wide concern, but I personally don't like the way that the medical program director thing is set up for emergency medicine, where one MPD is basically the sole policy maker for a county's EMS system. And there are different types of systems out there. And there's some legislators that are also firefighters that are interested in looking further into that. So I'll probably be conspiring with them, whether we would like it or not.
I have just one. It was 2065 this year about juvenile points, increasing offender scores, and a lot of us already know, but that a similar bill passed a couple of years ago, just 2 cycles ago, that would prevent juvenile scores from increasing sentencing length, but the retroactivity component wasn't included, and I'd like to see that one come back and hopefully pass with state funding to support it.
Just for the record, since you're making a list, my list was very duplicative of Wayne's. I wanted public defense, number one, the issue that I talked about funding, and I think maybe proposing some kind of work group on what will be the right sort of step on that. The county financing tools, the parks, although I was focused a little bit on maybe resurrecting our bill that I know it didn't get very far, but it just seems so not controversial about giving more flexibility within park impact fees to use a little bit of it for M&O. We tried that in 2019, I want to say, and it didn't get very far.
Some realtors that
Realtors and builders, I think.
sent a letter.
It would be probably, I think, something, if we want to do that, to queue up a strategy for the interim, to really go out to the master builders, go out to.
Why would they
the
care if
realtors,
you're not asking for more, you're just asking for flexibility?
So it becomes part of the education and
Yeah.
that we really need to do in the interim.
Yeah, are they just hoping that they stop us from using it and then they get it
If
back?
they can't use it, they'll stop collecting it.
Well, they get it back by law after 10 years. Is that what they're after? Because I can't understand, I don't even understand the argument. I have a letter in my file we got a letter from Olympian Master Builders opposing our proposal, and I
Right.
didn't understand the argument.
There were a
Do you
couple,
wanna take a run at it?
Sure,
Since
there-
I have a perspective.
okay,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
I'd love to hear yours too. But there were a couple of bills that were introduced this year that would change how impact fees were collected and when they would need to be returned. So where the master builders, the realtors, BIAW are coming from is there's too many regulations, there's too many impact fees, it's making housing too costly, and that also has an impact on the housing crisis. So they would like to see all of those things reduced. And then I think they also think that if you're given more flexibility, then you say, well, now we need to increase our impact fees because there's just not enough to go around. So they're worried that it's the nose under the tent, where it would make it grow and grow.
So if you allow them to use O&M, then you're gonna say, well, we need more O&M.
Yeah,
We're gonna raise
and
it.
now we need more for capital costs, yeah.
Right, and my perspective, one of the barriers for the bill is the same as it is for REIT. The builders want to see that funding that they have to pay in used for more infrastructure that supports more development. So these funds, if used according to the law, are a benefit to the building community. And they want to retain that benefit. If we siphon it off for M&O, then we're not laying the foundation for more development. And that is, not harmful to their industry, but, not supportive of it the way the laws are today.
Interesting.
And then my last topic was animal something. Help, animal help.
Yeah.
Meat processing.
Jeez,
Different side of the equation.
Is that what you're talking about?
Not exactly.
Do not conflate the two initiatives.
I want to just add one thing, joint sever liability. I mean, I just think it's worth talking about because it's just gonna get
Joint sever
worse.
liability.
These awards are gonna continue to be out of hand. Jury awards and stuff.
Oh,
And we
sure.
get hammered on torts
Yeah,
for
yeah.
all the
Sovereign immunity, please.
Yeah. And it just,
tort reform.
it's deep pockets and we're just in trouble. I don't know when we're gonna be defending against that, so. Other than that, I mean, a lot of these things
Yeah, so,
I just didn't hear that one come up.
thank you. We'll add that. It's 11:20. The forest topic's a pretty huge topic. And we've got that to cover. So can we wrap up with, Deborah, do you have what you need from us? Thank you for the update.
What's the next step?
I think probably an easy next step, once Deborah's had an opportunity to relax for a little while on vacation. We can take these ideas and I think really kind of maybe categorizing them into three different buckets. Those which are Thurston County specific, those that probably lend themselves very well to a shared priority amongst the jurisdictions. And then what are probably could be ours, but more closely aligned with a legislative agenda from the state association.
So county,
County.
it's like our
shared-
county government, regional, and then statewide.
And there is the April 19th, what's that deadline?
Deadline. I don't get those emails.
I'll send it to you.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah.
Nice to meet you.
Before you go, maybe we can set up the next meeting with Deborah in about a month or so to review that list and for the board to prioritize it.
We should also put judicial reimbursements on the list.
Oh, yes,
Oh.
we do need to talk
Thank
about
you.
that. Yes, thank you.
Thank you for that reminder. I can't believe I blanked on that.
I'm gonna head to Grand Mountain. I'm gonna try to zoom in on this. This is kind of a follow-up to a lot of the public comments that we had.
You're in the wake of that public comment,
Okay.
if anything.
There was somebody that said something that the concept of defensible space was outdated, and that is like so far from the truth. I hope that's understood. Defensible space is like, that's how you defend houses against wildland fires. Like, everybody knows that, so I don't know if that
as part of the discussion, but I was like blown away by somebody.
There's a whole bunch of science that I've been given that says that the home hardening is way more important than cutting away all the tree canopy, and so there's pushback on that.
Yeah. When there's nothing to burn around your house can't catch on fire.
Yeah,
Okay.
but yeah, that's not too connected to this. Hello, guys. Sorry we cut into time, and we'll just have to manage that as best we can.
A lot of that was really interesting and happy to support.
Okay. So we are on to topic 3, which is ordinance for A25 forest land conversions. This is a follow-up to a public hearing where we got some new input that had not been previously received by the board. So the board wanted to pause and come back and kind of just reset with what various topics that might need to be addressed or not. And so I'm going to turn it over to Ashley.
Thank you. And I just want to clarify, it was open public comment period that we received additional comments. Just want to distinguish that because a public hearing, we would have sent out notice to all the stakeholders. And that might become relevant as the board discusses what changes to make to this package, because we haven't necessarily reached out to the broad group of stakeholders that have been engaged in this process for the last year and a half. Appreciate the opportunity to come back today. Ashley Rye, Community Planning Manager, joined by Dana Bowers, who our associate planner has been working with all these stakeholder groups over the last year and a half, balancing a lot of different feedback related to housing and forest conservation. I wasn't sure if you had a question. So for purposes of today, we're just gonna hone in on what we heard were the two primary questions that came up during that public comment. One of those was the proposed code revisions don't require enough tree replanting or protect enough landmark or heritage trees as part of the new tree conservation chapter. And then there's a lack of consistency with the recently passed WUI related bill, that's Senate Bill 6120, which relates to the Wildland Urban Interface Code and defensible space. To start off with, we wanted to provide some context for what is currently required for tree conservation in the county and what's being proposed. And then it's really up to the board whether you want to increase the amount of either tree planting that would be required and or landmark or heritage trees that are conserved. But we just want to make sure you understand what is currently in place on the books in the development code and what we're proposing. And what we're proposing went through that broad stakeholder process. So on the table up here, we use the term units in the code. To make things simpler, we changed it over to seedlings because each one of those units, when you think about replanting, is really a little tree in the ground. So if you look at what we currently have on the books, right now it's split between what's within the urban growth area for required tree replanting and what's outside the urban growth area in rural and incorporated county. And so currently there is no replanting requirement in rural county. So 0 seedlings or 0 units required per acre as part of a forest conversion permit application. In urban growth areas, we have a little bit. We have 1 tree per every 4,000, roughly 4,000 square feet. So it basically ends up being about 11 seedlings per acre that would be required under a forest conversion permit within the UGA. And just for context, state commercial forestry permits that do require replanting, because the intention is it's going to be harvested again in the future, it's 190. So where we landed was somewhere in between in working with the stakeholders and looking at what other counties have, and that's that 100 seedlings per acre for tree replanting, acknowledging that this isn't, it's a conversion permit, it's not for long-term timber harvesting. And then, of course, no changes to the state, although it'd be great if we could propose changes to theirs. And then if you go down to tree retention, right now we We have 0. I mean, of course, we have critical areas protections, which apply to Oregon white oaks and things like that. But in terms of these new categories of landmark and heritage trees, we have 0 retention of those required right now, either within the UGA or rural unincorporated. As part of the proposal with this whole like unit system, the idea is to incentivize retaining those. And so we worked into that unit system or that calculation, 30% of the landmark trees, which ends up being 3 per acre, 70% of those heritage trees. And that would apply either within rural county or UGA. We are open to changing those point systems. It's not necessarily as easy as just, let's bump landmark up 50%. We would have to recalculate the whole unit system to make sure that it tracks. But we're open to receive. We would also want to check back in with the other stakeholder groups that didn't participate in the public comment period, but did participate in our public process and the public hearing.
What's the difference as far as landmark and heritage, the species? How do we make that determination?
Yeah, Dana, can you speak to that?
Absolutely. So the difference between landmark and heritage, the landmark trees are any trees over 24 inches in diameter at breast height. So a 24-inch diameter tree is a roughly around anywhere from 40 to 80 years old, depending on the species. So that's the landmark. The heritage trees are 40 inches and greater. They're pretty rare in our county. And they also include culturally modified trees and any designated trees for historical reasons. So for example, if the bush butternut tree was still with us today, it was categorized and labeled, it was on the historic register and so it would be, being that it was listed, would have been in the historic, or it would have been in the heritage tree classification.
Commissioner Fournier?
Thank you. Gary kind of asked my same question, but I'm more curious about, and I think you classified as the heritage trees. Just in talking with some of the members of the Nisqually tribe, it's really important that there's these like culturally significant trees that exist out in these forests that they used as like way markers. And I mean, they were, the chairman was showing me pictures of these trees, like they were like pictures of children in his wallet bifold. It's that significant. Like, how have we incorporated like that aspect of culturally significant trees into these considerations to make sure that we're kind of, being mindful of that?
No, I appreciate that. And we have been working with the tribes. And I think what we tried to put together was a reflection that we have no protections on the book today for these kinds of trees. And this would essentially allow us to review any tree on site over that 40 inch diameter grass height and be able to reach out to the tribe and work with them.
Right. As a cultural resource, we would want to honor the tribe's sovereignty and let them really identify those and bring them to us.
Okay, thank you.
Can you explain, you said if there's an adjustment, it affects the point system, or can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, we opted based on what other counties are doing in Central Puget Sound region to use like a tree density calculation rather than just sort of minimum percentages as a way to incentivize keeping larger trees instead of planting 100 new seedlings. But we structured it so that, in terms of the points that each of these different categories are on page 21 is where you'll be able to find that table. Probably don't want to change a lot of those numbers without looking at it holistically to make sure that those incentives are still in place. And that's something we could do at the board's request.
Mostly, On the tribal stuff, it's cedar trees that they used for bark for baskets and stuff, isn't it?
It's one of them, and I wouldn't want to limit it to that because, you know, as Commissioner Fournier mentioned, you know, it could be any tree for wayfinding, and it's not limited to cedars.
And what's nice.
A lot of the ones that I was shown, they're used as like waypoint, like it's like a road sign on a trail, and like they would like bend a branch a certain way, and it would signify that, you know, this was an intersection of, you know, the Cowlitz Trail and the such and such trail, or things like that.
And what's nice about these proposed code updates is there will actually be a tree conservation plan that would have to be submitted alongside development so that staff could get to review this. Right now, there isn't one that gets submitted.
So this code
We have zero.
provides more protection.
It provides a lot more protection than right now. We have 0 and 0 in rural county, and then of course only 11 trees being replanted in urban growth areas, or 0 for trees being retained. We don't require tree conservation plans right now.
And the table that you have here, proposed means proposed in the ordinance that the board already reviewed.
Yep, the one that was set for adoption for that last board meeting. And
Right, not proposed in response to the comments.
no, we haven't changed anything. We really wanted to hear from the board on if they wanted us to take a fresh look at that and work with our stakeholder groups again.
So the points only relate to replanting? That's the only thing that the 100 points is about?
It's a combination of, it's an incentive-based system, so the points relate both to replanting as well as retention. But they all hang together. So if you, it's like, you know, if you start pulling threads and changing the points for different categories, we would just want to make sure that we make the appropriate changes in the retention piece too, to keep that incentive in place.
So can you just walk us, so the main thing I remember from, trying to look at my notes on my phone from the public comment was a lot of people coming in saying, well, you've got 100 points and it should be 300 or at least 200. And what was that, like, can you walk me through what does that mean?
Yeah, and so when
For this retention versus replanting?
Yeah, and that's where we, you know, we went back and looked, and it's like, well, state commercial forestry permit requires 100 and, it's essentially, it would be like 190 points in the context of how we currently have the
Points
point
per
system.
acre.
Yeah, it's points per acre or like seedlings per acre, so 200 points. If you just plugged that in right now to what we currently have, would mean 200 seedlings per acre. And that's why we'd have to take a more holistic look at it. You can't just change that number.
But what you're saying is, if I have an acre of land and I wanna cut some of the trees for some reason, I can either leave 100, well, let's use 100. I can either leave 90 trees and then cut 10 and replant those 10 so that I'm back to 100? Or can you expand the mechanics of it?
So if you have an acre and let's say your choices, I would modify that a little bit. Your choices are to clear it and plant 100 brand new seedlings.
Because I cleared it and no matter how many trees were there, I just cleared it. It could have been 5 trees there, it could have been, I don't know how many maximum amount of trees can be on an acre, but 300 trees. And I cut them all, but I've got to get back to 100.
You got to get back to 100. So your options are 100 new baby trees, or to incentivize you not cutting all the trees, we say, hey, we'll give you 30 points if you keep a landmark tree. So that means you don't have to plant 30 baby trees because you've kept this tree, this bigger tree.
30 points for a landmark tree?
24 inches at.
Diameter breast height, which ends up being 3 per acre. Now they are bigger, the drip lines are going to be bigger. If the board wants us to look at raising that, we can do that. But I just want to make clear that we'd want to look at all of the numbers because it's set to be an incentive for keeping those, but if we change them, we might have to adjust other stuff.
question. So it's just hard to know, like, not without knowing the numbers. I mean, how many trees are normal on an acre? I mean, I know DNR, don't they have to leave 8 trees per acre? And nobody's happy with that, but that's what they're doing. And so it just seems like if people are having to only leave 3 trees in an acre, because they get their they get 90 points credit because they're over 24 inches.
The DNR also is replanting for forestry versus this being really looking at using the property differently, where you are trying to site and develop a home on there, and how do you preserve the tree canopy that's already there or restore it, and trying to find that balance. Because I think ultimately when you do try to incentivize with those larger trees, you have to be very cognizant of the drip lines, and just because in the roots, because you have to be able to make sure they're still healthy and survive. So if you don't plan accordingly, then you could compromise that.
Couldn't you come back with a visual of, here's an acre, and we're gonna put a house on it? I don't know, would that apply? Or here's a 3-acre parcel, and we're gonna put a house on it, but we need to clear a driveway and a house location. Is that what we're talking about? Which, there, I see it now.
We did this really quickly, so it's not
Yeah.
like carving out for a house.
Or are you talking about more of a development in the urban growth area?
Most of the forest conversion permits, when we've looked historically, are for single-family homes. And so
That's
if
what
you
it's
think
for,
about
single-family home.
single-family
On a-
home, and you have
maybe
a
a 5-acre
garage.
parcel.
Yeah, and so it's the home, it's the garage, it's the driveway, it's a yard, it's septic, yes, your well. And so there's a lot of considerations there, and Dana has worked really closely with not only the tree protection groups, but as well as Olympia Master Builders to really understand what the impacts would be. And the reason that and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the reason that they have supported this new chapter is because it provides flexibility. And so that's really what that tree density calculation, it's trying to find that balance
This was
between tree conservation.
By the master builders, you say they supported.
But the flexibility that if they get to a site and they don't have a lot of options, that they at least have the flexibility to replant rather than conserve.
Did you say that the state forestry standard for a forest is 190?
Yeah.
So if the board were to set this at 200 per acre, then that's basically saying that all the properties that we are slated for development, zoned for development, would have to have so much trees, it's up to a forest standard.
If that was the only number that changed within the proposed code, yes. We could make other adjustments to, that 200 isn't worth one seedling. But we would have to make those adjustments if, otherwise it would be greater than what the state requires for their commercial forestry.
And the state is requiring that because it's going back in another 40 years, it's gonna be harvested again.
Well, sure, but what I'm saying is we would be requiring so much trees, where's the development?
Yeah, we wouldn't be able to have any
Supposed to take place
development.
on the
That's-
property.
That's just it.
Or if you increase the number of points per seedling, you're still not increasing the number of trees, the actual number of trees. So I don't see the point in adjusting the points.
Commissioner Mejia?
Can I just switch gears and ask about the weed code and how it connects to this? That was one of the pieces where I mean, just the weed code in itself, it's like,
As long as we could go back, then we can switch gears.
Yeah.
We're done with that topic.
Yeah, well, we can stick on this, but I just want to be sure that we address that piece as well, because that's one of the pieces we heard in public. And that's one of the ones where I'm trying to connect it in my head, so. But we can still stay on this if there's more questions.
Well, we'll get to WUI code. I mean, I guess, so another thing I had, looking at my notes from public comment, was somebody said, well, and you just said, you said heritage, Dan, I think said heritage trees are pretty rare. So if they're rare, there was a suggestion that why don't we just say you can't cut that unless you get approval of the CPED, director or delegate or whatever. Is that a reasonable approach? I mean, or is there?
No, I think that just adds way too much cost to somebody building their house, and we're gonna tell them. I'd like to go back to the Attorney General's guidance from September of 2018 that tries to minimize as much government impact as possible so that we're not telling someone, well, you've got a tree here, so you can't put your house here. If we're talking about a small lot, I don't know, 1 acre lot or something, that's not gonna work either. That's gonna end up being a taking under the guidelines given out by the Attorney General. And I think that's a mistake if we make it cut in stone, that thou shall not. So there has to be some leeway. We're not gonna take a vote on this today, are we?
Staff need guidance on whether or not you'd like to, move forward with the ordinance before you, or if you want them to open it up again and make changes.
We were ready for final action, and so as specific a guidance as you can give us would be helpful at this point.
I'm gonna go with the master builder's proposal. Just because that's what they had agreed to as part of this negotiation. It's my understanding. And now we've had a public comment that has concerns about that. I recognize that, but I don't think we can make it so restrictive that we start affecting housing.
Ashley, could you also, it seems that when we were talking about this, I seem to recall that these issues were raised during the development of the code, perhaps not directly to the board, but that you had looked at these things, or had they come up during the development of the code?
They didn't come up, the folks, the stakeholders that we've been working with have indicated that they misread the code. And so we have been working with them, but that once they had a full understanding of what was being proposed, they are bringing these concerns before the board.
Okay, thank you.
Can you describe a situation in which, so I'm interested in this point that Commissioner Edwards raises, which is different than what my understanding. So is this code written in a way that, does it guide the way you have to retain trees to be consistent with your project, or does it operate in a way that it could block a project? Like, I want to build a home, could I come and you're gonna tell me how I'm gonna have to retain trees to build my home? Or can I come and you can say, I'm saying the government, CPED, whatever, can say that project can't be built because you didn't your project proposes to cut too many trees?
It's a combination of requirements, retention, like the ones we've been talking about, that 30% landmark, 70% heritage, and along with flexibility. And so if those minimums can't be accommodated on the site, I mean, most of the parcels that come in now, they're balancing a lot. You've got critical areas, you've got access issues. I mean, so we wanted to make it a combination. If it's just requirements, then you're gonna have a lot of people having to go through a reasonable use exception or a variance process because they're not able to meet it. And so we opted for this balancing act, and even if the minimums that are in there can't be met, there are options for permittees to go through, and they would have to just demonstrate that there aren't any other feasible options on that site that would make it developable.
So that doesn't require them to go to a reasonable use exception or hearing exam?
It does require a level of like variance, because it's discretionary at that point. It's not just a straight administrative decision. if you start saying like 100% of this needs to be required,
But you're saying that the way it's written offers that administrative flexibility.
to, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's in there now.
Ashley, what were the stakeholders' understanding? If you're saying that once it came out, they read it and they said, oh, that's not what we understood was happening, did they tell you what they were hoping for, what they understood before?
Yeah, I'll let Dana jump in here because you've been working most directly with them.
To me, in working with the stakeholders, they understood that the percentages would be, I think paramount is the right word, to the points. And maybe I got the impression that they didn't see the point system, that they didn't see the table piece. And so when they recognized that on a parcel per acre, that 30% of all of the trees that were in the landmark classification would be kept, regardless of the amount of points that were retained, then that seemed more amenable to their goals. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
No.
Okay.
I'm not sure if we're exactly clear on what their prior understanding was. We do have some of the stakeholders here in the audience versus what their current understanding is.
Love to say something.
I can't.
But I think
We
that's a
don't
good
have much
question.
time to do this.
I think what's clear is now they're asking for at least 50. I think the latest was introducing a new provision that would have tree conservation on at least 50% of the property or the undeveloped portion. Only apply the 100 points within the developed footprint and adjust the proposed points to preserve 100% of the heritage trees and 50% of landmark trees.
Does this have anything in there having to do with pruning of any of these trees? And I'm going to give you an example in just a second. Is there anything about pruning or topping,
Thinning is addressed in the context of.
thinning or something, but
Yeah.
individual trees? I mean, a individual tree to top that tree so it's not a hazard tree anymore. Is there anything in there about that?
There are provisions for managing your forest lands essentially to reduce hazards
Well, like,
and maintain a
if-
healthy canopy.
well, I guess that's not what I'm probably
Oh.
proposing. I'm proposing making it a very unhealthy canopy if they were forced into this.
Oh.
If you were to, I happened to notice a development, and I believe it was in the city of Olympia rather than the UGA. And the outfit tried to leave a bunch of what you'd call these heritage trees. They were nice, big fir trees like that. But they left them all along the property line that coincides with the right-of-way of the road. And so everything else has been taken down where the building is actually gonna take place. And so we get a windstorm or something, and now we've got trees blowing over the road and down over the power lines and such. So the only solution to that would be, okay, we're gonna go by the guidelines. Now we're gonna cut them all off at, 30 feet, and that doesn't create a healthy canopy. It becomes detrimental to what we're trying to propose here of a balance. So that becomes my concern if we start getting too restrictive. Those are the kind of things that will be happening.
No, I think that's really good feedback for reviewing the tree conservation plans. And I will say that this has been a year and a half in the making of trying to work with a broad spectrum of stakeholders. This doesn't have to be the end. We're working on a tree canopy study right now that will be very informative for the board and help the board set targets potentially. And that you can always revisit this, and at that point, you've got case studies. So to your request, Commissioner Edwards, case studies of what does this look like? What kind of tree conservation plans are we getting? Are we running into concerns from the builders regarding being able to meet these requirements? Or has it been pretty easy and let's go ahead and increase those numbers? Right now, we don't have that because we don't have any requirements. So the longer we go without any requirements, the more trees it will definitely be cut. So I just want to put that out there.
Can I restate what stakeholder concern is?
We can't, right now, we don't have time. Robin?
In the interest of time,
Yep.
because you've barely gotten through, you have not even gotten through this first topic, and there are other items of concern.
Yep.
If commissioners, are available, we have a work session this afternoon. And if staff are also available this afternoon, we could, we have, the diversity is the first item on the agenda at 2:00 today. That should only take about a half an hour. And then after that, you have, budget. There's an hour and a half reserved for the budget. We do not need that much time. We could continue this conversation this afternoon, or obviously you need more time. We could look for another date.
Be 3:30 today.
I'm suggesting today at 2:30, and reduce the time for the budget.
2:00 is racial equity.
Yep.
2:30 is the budget.
2:30 is the budget.
So
Maybe half an hour for the budget, so we could start this by 3.
TCOM this afternoon.
Yeah.
I
But that's okay.
understand
I
you
can,
have,
I'll,
I understand
I'll
that.
make it
That's
work
why
as best
just
I
made
can.
it
I've
an
got a
option.
call in. They said they didn't, maybe they weren't gonna have a quorum unless I went and stuff, so, but we'll balance it out. But I think
doesn't have
this
to
is,
be today. I mean.
this is worth discussing.
No, it does not have to be today, but
Do
you
you
know.
currently have a completely empty block next Wednesday? There's
I
nothing-
was looking at that, and I'm not sure what the conflict is next
We
Wednesday.
can address the next item while they're looking at calendars. I would say that the references to defensible space, those were placeholders that the planning commission requested, given what at least we knew at the time was happening with the wildland wooey is easier. And I mean, I want to thank this commission, as well as other stakeholders around the state for really, asking for changes in that current legislation. I think our proposal at this point would be to remove the references that are in there. We can always come back, with a code correction, one of our code corrections, annual updates, to put them in there, but it seems like it's gonna be years before they have it worked out. And all we did was essentially, what was in the code was a reference to state provisions. We knew that it was in the works and wasn't finalized, and so we just put that placeholder in there. But it sounds like those state provisions, the final ones, aren't necessarily going to be finalized as it relates to defensible space for quite a while. And so just in case they shift to where they even exist in our CWs and whatnot, what you have before you is a slightly amended version that just removes those references. Doesn't mean that it's not an issue that has to be addressed, we just don't know
I'm good
what the
with that.
requirements are.
Can I ask a follow-up? Like, what is the impact of it? Just, I guess I'm just still trying to wrap my head around it, knowing that this is a very, I won't even get into, I know Commissioner Menser has had many sessions of that. But like, how does it like integrate, and us taking now that piece off, like what is the impact now?
None. It was really it was a placeholder. And the only references that are in here are for defensible space, which would create potential confusion if we have references to it, but that whole body of law hasn't been figured out by the state. So to just eliminate any potential confusion of, you know, a reference to an RCW, when you go there, there's nothing in there. Just removing it for now, and then we can come back and update it when the state provisions are finalized.
Any other questions on that topic?
That one was quick.
So,
I
is there a preference to having this on next week or today at 3:30?
Either one, that doesn't matter to me. I haven't looked at next week on my Wednesday schedule, so,
We've got a big empty.
if we got a big empty spot, well,
next
let's do it
Wednesday
then.
afternoon.
I think we should do it then, frankly, because there's just a lot of questions I still have to follow up on myself.
I would also have that preference. I just,
I'm with you.
That allows me also
I-
to go a little bit deeper into this and have some more conversation.
Thank you.
And I've got a chamber meeting. I think that's what Wayne went to, was a
You
chamber.
went to the Rochester Grand Mountain?
Yeah, I know. I'm not going to that one. I'm lazy, so.
And if any of commissioners have questions between now and then, like, please send them our way so that this is complex and we want to make sure that we come prepared next week so that we get direction. So, yeah, we're here to support you with information.
Great.
Thank you for the presentation.